A photo shows a massive group of young girls and boys holding candles at a vigil. Figure 9.1. Credit John Martinez Pavliga /Flickr /attribution 2 generic CCBY20. Chapter outline 9. 1. What is diversity and why is everybody talking about it? 9. 2 categories of diversity 9. 3. Navigating the diversity landscape 9. 4. Inclusivity and civility. What role can I play? Student survey, how do you feel about diversity, equity, and inclusion? These questions will help you determine how the chapter concepts relate to you right now. As you are introduced to new concepts and practices, it can be informative to reflect on how your understanding changes over time. We'll revisit these questions at the end of the chapter to see whether your feelings have changed. Take this quick survey to figure it out, ranking questions on a scale of 1-4, 1 meaning least like me, and 4 meaning most like me. I'm aware of the different categories of diversity and the various populations I may encounter. I think we sometimes go too far in trying to be sensitive to different groups. I think nearly everybody in our society has equal opportunity. It's not my role to ensure equity and inclusiveness among my peers or colleagues. You can also take the Chapter 9 survey anonymously online. Student profile. For the vast majority of my life, I thought being an Asian American who went through the Palo Alto School District meant that I was supposed to excel in academics. But in reality, I did the opposite. I struggled through college, both in classes and in seeking experiences for my future. At first, I thought I was unique in not living up to expectations. But as I met more people from all different backgrounds, I realized my challenges were not unique. I began capturing videos of students sharing their educational issues. Like me, many of my peers lack the study skills required to achieve our academic goals. The more I researched and developed videos documenting this lack of skill, the more I realized that student identities are often lost as they learn according to a traditional pedagogy. I began documenting students, narratives, and the specific strategies they used to overcome difficulty. Once we can celebrate a diverse student body and showcase their strengths and identities, as well as the skills necessary to excel academically, my hope is that students of all backgrounds can begin to feel that they belong. Henry Fan, Foothill College and San Jose State University. About this chapter. In this chapter, you will learn about diversity and how it plays a role in personal, civic, academic, and professional aspects of our lives. By the end of the chapter, you should be able to do the following. Articulate how diverse voices have been historically ignored or minimized in American civic life, education, and culture. Describe categories of identity and experience that contribute to diverse points of view. Acknowledge implicit bias and recognize privilege. Evaluate statements and situations based on their inclusion of diverse perspectives. Questions to consider. Historically, has diversity always been a concern? What does it mean to be civil? Why do people argue about diversity? What would Shakespeare say? An engraving shows a circular portrait of William Shakespeare with a question mark on the forehead. Figure 9.2, credit, sourced originally from Helmholtz, H.F. ed., History of the World. Dodd, Mead and Company, 1902/Perry Castaneda Library. University of Texas at Austin/Wikimedia Commons/public domain. In our classroom, everyone is the same. Consider a classroom containing 25 college students and their instructor. In this particular class, all of the students and the instructor share the same racial group, white. In fact, everyone in the class is a white American from the Midwest. The instructor is leading the class through reading a scene from William Shakespeare's drama Romeo and Juliet. As students read their parts, each one is thinking carefully about the role they have been given. One of the male students wonders what it would be like to read the part of Juliet. After all, men originally played the part in Shakespeare's day. The young woman reading Juliet wonders if anyone would object to her taking the role if they knew she was a lesbian. What would it be like, she wonders, if Romeo, her love interest, were also played by a woman? One reader strongly identifies as German American, but he is reading the part of an Italian. Another student has a grandmother who is African American, but he looks like every other white student in the room. No one recognizes his mixed-race heritage. After the students finish reading the scene, the instructor announces, "In our classroom, everyone is the same, but these days when Shakespeare is staged, there is a tendency for non-traditional casting. Romeo could be black, Juliet could be Latina, Lady Montague could be Asian. Do you think that kind of casting would disrupt the experience of seeing the play? In this case, the instructor makes the assumption that because everyone in the class looks the same, they are the same. What did the instructor miss about the potential for diversity in his classroom? Have you ever made a similar mistake? Diversity is more than what we can recognize from external clues such as race and gender. Diversity includes many unseen aspects of identity, like sexual orientation, political point of view, veteran status, and many other aspects that you may have not considered. To be inclusive and civil within your community, it is essential that you avoid making assumptions about how other people define or identify themselves. In this chapter, we will discover that each person is more than the sum of surface clues presented to the world. Personal experience, social and family history, public policy, and even geography play a role in how diversity is constructed. We'll also explore elements of civility and fairness within the college community. One important objective of civility is to become culturally competent. Culturally competent people understand the complexity of their own personal identity, values, and culture. In addition, they respect the personal identities and values of others who may not share their identity and values. Further, culturally competent people remain open-minded when confronted with new cultural experiences. They learn to relate to and respect difference. They look beyond the obvious and learn as much as they can about what makes each person different and appreciated. These concepts tie closely to Chapter 8, particularly the section on emotional intelligence and overcoming barriers to communication. What students say, do you think the diversity of your school's student body is reflected in course offerings and campus activities? Yes, somewhat know how comfortable are you when discussing issues of race, sexuality, religion, and other aspects of civility. Extremely comfortable, somewhat uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable. Do you generally feel welcomed and included on campus? Yes, no, it varies significantly by class or environment. You can also take the anonymous What Students Say surveys to add your voice to this textbook. Your responses will be included in updates. Students offer their views on these questions, and the results are displayed in the graphs below. Do you think the diversity of your school's student body is reflected in course offerings and campus activities? A horizontal bar graph plots the responses of a student's survey determining whether the diversity of school's student body is reflected in course offerings and campus activities. Figure 9. 3. How comfortable are you when discussing issues of race, sexuality, religion, and other aspects of civility? A horizontal bar graph plots the responses of a student's survey determining whether students are comfortable discussing issues of race, sexuality, religion, and other aspects of diversity. Figure 9. 4. Do you generally feel welcomed and included on campus? A horizontal bar graph plots the responses of a student's survey determining whether students generally feel welcomed and included on campus. Figure 9. 5. Why diversity matters. The United States of America is viewed the world over as a leader in democracy and democratic ideals. Our nation, young by most standards, continues to evolve to make the freedoms and opportunities available to all. Where the benefits of citizenship have been imperfect, discord over issues related to civil rights and inclusion have often been at the center of the conflict. To understand the importance of civility and civil engagement, it is necessary to acknowledge our country's history. The United States is a country born out of protest. Colonists protesting what they felt were unfair taxes under King George III was at the foundation of the Revolutionary War. Over time, many groups have been given their civil liberties and equal access to all that our country has to offer through that same spirit of protest and petition. A photo shows a crowd of people holding rainbow flags participating in the annual Pride Parade. Figure 9.6. Credit. Carl Campbell /Flickr /attribution 2 generic CCBY20. The United States is often described as a melting pot, a rich mixture made up of people of many colors, religions, abilities, etc., working together to make one great big stew. That is the image generations of Americans grew up learning, and it is a true one. The United States is a nation of immigrants, and cultural influences from around the world have added to its strength. Historically, however, not all contributions and voices have been acknowledged equally or adequately. Some groups have had to struggle to have their contributions acknowledged, be treated fairly, and be allowed full participation in the civic life of the country. Entire populations of people have been oppressed as a part of the nation's history, something important for Americans to confront and acknowledge. For example, in what is known as the Trail of Tears, the U.S. government forcibly removed Native Americans from their homelands and made them walk to reservations. Some had to travel more than 1,000 miles, and over 10,000 died on the journey. Further, in an act of forced assimilation, Native American children were taken from their families and placed in schools where they were not allowed to practice cultural traditions or speak their native languages. This practice continued as late as the 1970s. As a result, many Native American languages have been lost or are at risk of being lost. The slavery of Africans occurred in America for close to 250 years. Much of the wealth in the United States during that time came directly from the labor of enslaved people. However, the enslaved people themselves did not benefit financially. During World War II, Japanese Americans were placed into internment camps and considered a danger to our country because our nation was at war with Japan. For many years, all women and minority men were traditionally left out of public discourse and denied participation in government, industry, and even cultural institutions such as sports. For example, the United States Supreme Court was founded in 1789. However, the court's first female justice, Sandra Day O'Connor, was not appointed until 1981, almost 200 years later. Jackie Robinson famously became the first African-American Major League Baseball player in 1947 when he was hired by the Brooklyn Dodgers. Although the major leagues were established in 1869, decades earlier, the absence of white women and minorities was not an accident. Their exclusion was based on legal discrimination or unfair treatment. These are all examples of mistreatment, inequality, and discrimination, and they didn't end without incredible sacrifice and heroism. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s and the equal rights movement for women's rights in the 1970s are examples of how public protests work to bring attention to discriminatory practices and to create change. Because racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, and other forms of bias and intolerance still exist, civil engagement and protests continue, and policies must be constantly monitored. Many people still work to ensure the gains these communities have made in acquiring the rights of full citizenship are not lost. Diversity refers to differences in the human experience. As different groups have gained in number and influence, our definition of diversity has evolved to embrace many variables that reflect a multitude of different backgrounds, experiences, and points of view, not just race and gender. Diversity takes into account age, socioeconomic factors, ability, such as sight, hearing, and mobility, ethnicity, veteran status, geography, language, sexual orientation, religion, size, and other factors. At one time or another, each group has had to make petitions to the government for equal treatment under the law and appeals to society for respect. Safeguarding these groups, hard-won rights and public regard maintains diversity and its two closely related factors, equity and inclusion. Activity, our rights and protections are often acquired through awareness, effort, and, sometimes, protest. Each one of the following groups has launched protests over discrimination or compromises to their civil rights. Choose 3 of the groups below and do a quick search on protests or efforts members of the group undertook to secure their rights. To expand your knowledge, choose some with which you are not familiar. Record the name, time frame, and outcomes of the protest or movements you researched. The groups are as follows: veterans, senior citizens, blind or visually impaired people, Muslims, Christians, LGBTQ, plus community Hispanic Latinos, people with intellectual disabilities, undocumented immigrants, little people, college students, Jewish Americans, farm workers, wheelchair users. The role of equity and inclusion. Equity plays a major part in achieving fairness in a diverse landscape. Equity gives everyone equal access to opportunity and success. For example, You may have seen interpreters for deaf or hard of hearing people in situations where a public official is making an announcement about an impending weather emergency. Providing immediate translation into sign language means that there is no gap between what the public official is saying and when all people receive the information. Simultaneous sign language provides equity. Similarly, many students have learning differences that require accommodations in the classroom. For example, a student with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, might be given more time to complete tests or writing assignments. The extra time granted takes into account that students with ADHD process information differently. If a student with a learning difference is given more time than other students to complete a test, that is a matter of equity. The student is not being given an advantage. The extra time gives them an equal chance at success. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, 1990, is a federal government policy that addresses equity in the workplace, housing, and public places. The ADA requires reasonable accommodations so that people with disabilities have equal access to the same services as people without disabilities. For example, wheelchair lifts on public transportation, automatic doors, entrance ramps, and elevators are examples of accommodations that eliminate barriers of participation for people with certain disabilities. Without the above accommodations, those with a disability may justly feel like second-class citizens because their needs were not anticipated. Further, they might have to use their own resources to gain equal access to services, although their tax dollars contribute to providing that same access and service to other citizens. Equity levels the playing field so that everyone's needs are anticipated and everyone has an equal starting point. However, understanding equity is not enough. A diagram illustrates the difference between equality and equity. Figure 9:7 Equality is a meaningful goal, but it can leave people with unmet needs. Equity is more empowering and fair. In equality portion of the graphic, people all sizes and a person who uses a wheelchair are all given the same bicycle, which is unusable for most. In the equity portion, each person gets a bicycle specifically designed for them, enabling them to successfully ride it. Credit: Robert Wood Johnson Foundation/custom license. May be produced with attribution too. When equity is properly considered, there is also inclusion. Inclusion means that there are a multiplicity of voices, skills, and interests represented in any given situation. Inclusion has played a major role in education, especially in terms of creating inclusion classrooms and inclusive curricula. In an inclusion classroom, students of different skill levels study together. For example, students with and without developmental disabilities study in the same classroom. Such an arrangement eliminates the stigma of the special education classroom, where students were once segregated. In addition, in inclusion classrooms, all students receive support when needed. Students benefit from seeing how others learn. In an inclusive curriculum, a course includes content and perspectives from underrepresented groups. For example, a college course in psychology might include consideration of different contexts, such as immigration, incarceration, or unemployment, in addition to addressing societal norms. Inclusion means that these voices of varied background and experience are integrated into discussions, research, and assignments rather than ignored. Our country is becoming more diverse. You may have heard the phrase, majority-minority, meaning it is predicted that today's racial minorities will, collectively, be the majority of the population in the future. The graph from the Pew Research Center projects that by the year 2065, U.S. demographics will have shifted significantly. In 2019, the white population made up just over 60% of the population. In 2065, the Pew Research Center predicts that white people will be approximately 46% of the population. The majority of Americans will be the non-white majority, 54% Hispanic Latino people, Black people, and Asian people. A graphical representation shows the actual and projected percentage of total population of America over the years. Figure 9:8 United States demographics, or statistical characteristics of populations, are changing rapidly. In just over 35 years, the country as a whole will be a majority-minority nation, with ethnic racial minorities making up more than half of the population. Credit: based on work by the Pew Research Center. What does this mean? It could mean that the United States begins accepting Spanish as a mainstream language, since the Hispanic Latino population will be significantly larger. It could mean a changing face for local governments. It could mean that our country will elect its second non-white president. Beyond anything specific, the shifting demographics of the United States could mean greater attention is paid to diversity awareness, equity, and inclusion. Analysis question: what changes do you think will take place in the United States as its demographics shift? Education. Equity for all education has been one of the most significant arenas for social change related to our rights as Americans, and the effects of that change have significantly impacted other power dynamics in society. You need look no further than the landmark case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, 1954, to see how our nation has responded passionately in civil and uncivil ways to appeals for equity and inclusion in public education. For much of the 20th century, African Americans lived under government-sanctioned separation, better known as segregation. Not only were schools segregated, but Jim Crow laws allowed for legal separation in transportation, hospitals, parks, restaurants, theaters, and just about every aspect of public life. These laws enacted that there be whites-only water fountains and restrooms. Only white people could enter the front door of a restaurant or sit on the main level of a movie theater, while African Americans had to enter through the back door and sit in the balcony. The segregation also included Mexican Americans and Catholics, who were forced to attend separate schools. Brown v. Board of Education was a landmark Supreme Court case that challenged the interpretation of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. The case involved the father of Linda Brown suing the Topeka, Kansas, Board of Education for denying his daughter the right to attend an all-white school. Oliver Brown maintained that segregation left his black community with inferior schools, a condition counter to the Equal Protection Clause contained in Section I of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. There was widespread heated opposition to desegregated education across the country. Passions were even more severe after Brown v. Board of Education was won by the plaintiff on appeal to the United States Supreme Court. In effect, the case changed the power dynamics in America by leveling the playing field for education. No longer were white schools and their better resources legally segregated. In principle, there was equity, equal access. Debates in the courtrooms surrounding Brown were passionate but professional. Protests and debate in those communities directly affected by the decision, especially in the South, were intense, violent confrontations that demonstrated the height of incivility. One thing you may notice about uncivil behavior is the difficulty most have looking back on those actions. A black-and-white photo shows African American students arrive at Central High School in Little Rock in Army vehicles, escorted by soldiers from the 101 Airborne Division. Figure 9. After the Brown v. Board of Education decision, Americans pursued their rights for equal education in other districts. In Arkansas, a group of teenagers, which would come to be known as the Little Rock Nine, were blocked from entering a formerly whites-only school. Facing angry protesters, the state governor, and even the National Guard, the 9 students finally took their rightful place in the school after a judge ruled in their favor and President Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne Division to secure the situation. Credit, courtesy of the National Archives, sourced from the U.S. Army/Flickr/Attribution to generic CCBY. Educational institutions like colleges and school districts are critically important spaces for equity and inclusion, and debates around them remain challenging. Transgender students in America's schools face discrimination, harassment, and bullying, which causes nearly 45% of LGBTQ+ to feel unsafe because of their gender expression and 60% of to feel unsafe due to their sexual orientation. Many of these students miss school or experience significant stress, which usually has a negative impact on their grades, participation, and overall success. 3. In essence, this hostility creates inequality. Regardless of individual state or district laws on bathroom use and overall accommodation, federal law protects all students from discrimination, especially that based on categories such as gender. But implementation of these federal protections varies, and, in general, many outside the transgender community do not fully understand, empathize with, or support transgender rights. How can the circumstances improve for transgender students? In other societal changes throughout our nation's history, court decisions, new legislation, protests, and general public opinion combine to right past wrongs and provide justice and protection for mistreated people. For example, in 2015, the Supreme Court upheld the right to same-sex marriage under the 14th Amendment. Just as African Americans publicly debated and protested educational inequality, the gay community used discussion, protest, and debate to sway public and legal opinion. Proponents of gay marriage faced fervent argument against their position based on religion and culture. Like other minority groups, they were confronted with name-calling, job insecurity, family division, religious isolation, and physical confrontation. And as has often been the case, success in achieving marriage equality eventually came through the courts. Legal remedies are significant, but can take a very long time. Before they see success in the courts or legislatures, transgender students in America's schools will continue to undergo harsh treatment. Their lives and education will remain very difficult until people from outside their community better understand their situation. Debates, civility versus incivility. Healthy debate is a desirable part of a community. In a healthy debate, people are given room to explain their point of view. In a healthy airing of differences, people on opposing sides of an argument can reach common ground and compromise, or even agree to disagree and move on. However, incivility occurs when people are not culturally competent. An individual who is not culturally competent might make negative assumptions about others, values, lack an open mindset, or be inflexible in thinking. Instead of being tolerant of different points of view, they may try to shut down communication by not listening or by keeping someone with a different point of view from being heard at all. Out of frustration, a person who is uncivil may resort to name-calling or discrediting another person only with the intention of causing confusion and division within a community. Incivility can also propagate violence. Such uncivil reaction to difficult issues is what makes many people avoid certain topics at all costs. Instead of seeking out diverse communities, people retreat to safe spaces where they will not be challenged to hear opposing opinions or have their beliefs contested. Debates on difficult or divisive topics surrounding diversity, especially those promoting orchestrated change, are often passionate. People on each side may base their positions on deeply held beliefs, family traditions, personal experience, academic expertise, and a desire to orchestrate change. With such a strong foundation, emotions can be intense, and debates can become uncivil. Even when the disagreement is based on information rather than personal feelings, discussions can quickly turn to arguments. For example, in academic environments, it's common to find extremely well-informed arguments in direct opposition to each other. Two well-known economics faculty members from your college could debate for hours on financial policies, with each professor's position backed by data, research, and publications. Each person could feel very strongly that they are right and the other person is wrong. They may even feel that the approach proposed by their opponent would actually do damage to the country or to certain groups of people. But for this debate, whether it occurs over lunch or on an auditorium stage, to remain civil, the participants need to maintain certain standards of behavior. Activity. Describe a time when you could not reach an agreement with someone on a controversial issue. Did you try to compromise, combining your points of view so that each of you would be partially satisfied? Did either of you shut down communication? Was ending the conversation a good choice? Why or why not? Civility is a valued practice that takes advantage of cultural and political systems we have in place to work through disagreements while maintaining respect for others' points of view. Civil behavior allows for a respectful airing of grievances. The benefit of civil discussion is that members of a community can hear different sides of an argument, weigh evidence, and decide for themselves which side to support. You have probably witnessed or taken part in debates in your courses, at social events, or even at family gatherings. What makes people so passionate about certain issues? First, some may have a personal stake in an issue, such as abortion rights. Convincing other people to share their beliefs may be intended to create a community that will protect their rights. Second, others may have deeply held beliefs based on faith or cultural practices. They argue based on deeply held moral and ethical beliefs. Third, others may be limited in their background knowledge about an issue, but are able to speak from a script of conventional points of view. They may not want to stray from the script because they do not have enough information to extend an argument. Rules for fair debate. A photo shows a group of diverse students attending a lecture. Figure 9. 10. You'll participate in classroom or workplace debate throughout your academic or professional career. Civility is important to productive discussions and will lead to worthwhile outcomes. Credit. Creative sustainability /flicker /attribution to generic CCBY2. 0. The courtroom and the public square are not the only places where serious debate takes place. Every day we tackle tough decisions that involve other people, some of whom have strong opposing points of view. To be successful in college, you will need to master sound and ethical approaches to argument, whether it be for a mathematical proof or an essay in a composition class. You probably already know how to be sensitive and thoughtful when giving feedback to a family member or friend. You think about their feelings and the best way to confront your disagreement without attacking them. Of course, sometimes it's easier to be less sensitive with people who love you no matter what. Still, whether in a classroom, a workplace, or your family dinner table, there are rules for debating that help people with opposing points of view get to the heart of an issue while remaining civil. Avoid direct insults and personal attacks. The quickest way to turn someone away from your discussion is to attack them personally. This is actually a common logical fallacy called ad hominem, which means to the person, and it means to attack the person rather than the issue. Avoid generalizations and extreme examples. These are two more logical fallacies called bandwagon or ad populum, and reduction to absurdity or argumentum ad absurdum. The first is when you argue that everyone is doing something, so it must be right. The second is when you argue that a belief or position would lead to an absurd or extreme outcome. Avoid appealing to emotions rather than facts. It's easy to get emotional if you're debating something about which you feel passionate. Someone disagreeing with you can feel like a personal affront. This fallacy, called argument to compassion, appeals to one's emotions and happens when we mistake feelings for facts. While strong and motivating, our feelings are not great arbiters of the truth. Avoid irrelevant arguments. Sometimes it's easy to change the subject when we're debating, especially if we feel flustered or like we're not being heard. Irrelevant conclusion is the fallacy of introducing a topic that may or may not be sound logic, but is not about the issue under debate. Avoid appeal to bias. You may not have strong opinions on every topic, but no doubt you are opinionated about things that matter to you. This strong view can create a bias or a leaning toward an idea or belief. While there's nothing wrong with having a strong opinion, you must be mindful to ensure that your bias doesn't create prejudice. Ask yourself if your biases influence the ways in which you interact with other people and with ideas that differ from your own. Avoid appeal to tradition. Just because something worked in the past or was true in the past does not necessarily mean that it is true today. It's easy to commit this fallacy, as we often default to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's appealing because it seems to be common sense. However, it ignores questions such as whether the existing or old policy truly works as well as it could, and if new technology or new ways of thinking can offer an improvement. Old ways can certainly be good ways, but not simply because they are old. Avoid making assumptions. Often, we think we know enough about a topic or maybe even more than the person talking, so we jump ahead to the outcome. We assume we know what they're referring to, thinking about, or even imagining, but this is a dangerous practice because it often leads to misunderstandings. In fact, most logical fallacies are the result of assuming. Strive for root cause analysis. Getting at the root cause of something means to dig deeper and deeper until you discover why a problem or disagreement occurred. Sometimes, the most obvious or immediate cause for a problem is not actually the most significant one. Discovering the root cause can help to resolve the conflict or reveal that there isn't one at all. Avoid obstinacy. In the heat of a debate, it's easy to dig in your heels and refuse to acknowledge when you're wrong. Your argument is at stake, and so is your ego. However, it's important to give credit where it's due and to say you're wrong if you are. If you misquoted a fact or made an incorrect assumption, admit to it and move on. Strive for resolution. While some people like to debate for the sake of debating, in the case of a true conflict, both parties should seek agreement or at least a truce. One way to do this is to listen more than you speak. Listen, listen, listen. You'll learn and perhaps make better points of your own if you deeply consider the other point of view. Analysis question. Have you ever witnessed incivility in person or an argument in the news? Briefly describe what happened. Why do you think individuals are willing to shut down communication over issues they are passionate about? Online civility. The internet is the watershed innovation of our time. It provides incredible access to information and resources, helping us to connect in ways inconceivable just a few decades ago. But it also presents risks, and these risks seem to be changing and increasing at the same rate as technology itself. Because of our regular access to the internet, it's important to create a safe, healthy, and enjoyable online space. A chart illustrates the expectations for digital civility in the 2020s. Figure 9. 11 Microsoft's Digital Civility Research survey asked people their opinions on the future of online behavior and communication. While in some cases, the respondents thought circumstances would improve, predictions about the others, such as harassment and bullying, are more bleak. Credit based on work from Microsoft, Expectations for Digital Civility 2020. 4. In the survey conducted by Microsoft, nearly 4 in 10 respondents feel unwanted online contact, 39%, bullying, 39%, and unwelcome sexual attention, 39%, will worsen in 2020. A slightly smaller percentage, 35%, expect people's reputations, both professional and personal, will continue to be attacked online. 1/4, 25%, of respondents see improvement across each of these risk areas in 2020. Digital civility is the practice of leading with empathy and kindness in all online interactions and treating each other with respect and dignity. This type of civility requires users to fully understand and appreciate potential harms and to follow the new rules of the digital road. You can find a discussion on best practices for online communication, often referred to as netiquette, in Chapter 8 on communicating. Following are some basic guidelines to help exercise digital civility. Live the golden rule and treat others with respect and dignity both online and off. Respect differences of culture, geography, and opinion, and when disagreements surface, engage thoughtfully. Pause before replying to comments or posts you disagree with, and ensure responses are considerate and free of name-calling and abuse. Stand up for yourself and others if it's safe and prudent to do so. Questions to consider. What is identity? Can a person have more than one identity? Can identity be ambiguous? What are fluidity and intersectionality? The multiple roles we play in life, student, sibling, employee, roommate, for example, are only a partial glimpse into our true identity. Right now, you may think, I really don't know what I want to be, meaning you don't know what you want to do for a living, but have you ever tried to define yourself in terms of the sum of your parts? Social roles are those identities we assume in relationship to others. Our social roles tend to shift based on where we are and who we are with. Taking into account your social roles as well as your nationality, ethnicity, race, friends, gender, sexuality, beliefs, abilities, geography, etc. Who are you? Who am I? Popeye, a familiar 20th century cartoon character, was a sailor philosopher. He declared his own identity in a circular manner, landing us right where we started. I am what I am, and that's all that I am. Popeye proves his existence rather than help us identify him. It is his title, the Sailor Man, that tells us how Popeye operates in the social sphere. According to the American Psychological Association, personal identity is an individual's sense of self defined by A. a set of physical, psychological, and interpersonal characteristics that is not wholly shared with any other person, and B, a range of affiliations, e.g., ethnicity and social roles. Your identity is tied to the most dominant aspects of your background and personality. 5. It determines the lens through which you see the world and the lens through which you receive information. Activity. Complete the following statement using no more than 4 words. I am. It is difficult to narrow down our identity to just a few options. One way to complete the statement would be to use gender and geography markers. For example, I am a male New Englander, or I am an American woman. Assuming they are true, no one can argue against those identities, but do those statements represent everything or at least most things that identify the speakers? Probably not. Try finishing the statement again by using as many words as you wish. I am. If you ended up with a long string of descriptors that would be hard for a new acquaintance to manage, don't worry. Our identities are complex and reflect that we lead interesting and multifaceted lives. To better understand identity, consider how social psychologists describe it. Social psychologists, those who study how social interactions take place, often categorize identity into 4 types: personal identity, role identity, social identity, and collective identity. Personal identity captures what distinguishes one person from another based on life experiences. No 2 people, even identical twins, live the same life. Role identity defines how we interact in certain situations. Our roles change from setting to setting, and so do our identities. At work, you may be a supervisor. In the classroom, you are a peer working collaboratively. At home, you may be the parent of a 10-year-old. In each setting, your bubbly personality may be the same, but how your coworkers, classmates, and family see you is different. Social identity shapes our public lives by our awareness of how we relate to certain groups. For example, an individual might relate to or identify with Korean Americans, Chicagoans, Methodists, and Lakers fans. These identities influence our interactions with others. Upon meeting someone, for example, we look for connections as to how we are the same or different. Our awareness of who we are makes us behave a certain way in relation to others. If you identify as a hockey fan, you may feel an affinity for someone else who also loves the game. Collective identity refers to how groups form around a common cause or belief. For example, individuals may bond over similar political ideologies or social movements. Their identity is as much a physical formation as a shared understanding of the issues they believe in. For example, many people consider themselves part of the collective energy surrounding the Me Too movement. Others may identify as fans of a specific type of entertainment, such as Trekkies, fans of the Star Trek series. I am large. I contain multitudes. Walt Whitman. In his epic poem Song of Myself, Walt Whitman writes, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." Whitman was asserting and defending his shifting sense of self and identity. Those lines importantly point out that our identities may evolve over time. What we do and believe today may not be the same tomorrow. Further, at any one moment, the identities we claim may seem at odds with each other. Shifting identities are a part of personal growth. While we are figuring out who we truly are and what we believe, our sense of self and the image that others have of us may be unclear or ambiguous. Many people are uncomfortable with identities that do not fit squarely into one category. How do you respond when someone's identity or social role is unclear? Such ambiguity may challenge your sense of certainty about the roles that we all play in relationship to one another. Racial, ethnic, and gender ambiguity, in particular, can challenge some people's sense of social order and social identity. When we force others to choose only one category of identity, race, ethnicity, or gender, for example, to make ourselves feel comfortable, we do a disservice to the person who identifies with more than one group. For instance, people with multiracial ancestry are often told that they are too much of one and not enough of another. The actor Keanu Reeves has a complex background. He was born in Beirut, Lebanon, to a white English mother and a father with Chinese-Hawaiian ancestry. His childhood was spent in Hawaii, Australia, New York, and Toronto. Reeves considers himself Canadian and has publicly acknowledged influences from all aspects of his heritage. Would you feel comfortable telling Keanu Reeves how he must identify racially and ethnically? There is a question many people ask when they meet someone whom they cannot clearly identify by checking a specific identity box. Inappropriate or not, you have probably heard people ask, "What are you?" Would it surprise you if someone like Keanu Reeves shrugged and answered, "I'm just me"? Malcolm Gladwell is an author of 5 New York Times bestsellers and is hailed as one of foreign policy's top global thinkers. He has spoken on his experience with identity as well. Gladwell has a Black Jamaican mother and a white Irish father. He often tells the story of how the perception of his hair has allowed him to straddle racial groups. As long as he kept his hair cut very short, his fair skin obscured his Black ancestry, and he was most often perceived as white. However, once he let his hair grow long into a curly afro style, Gladwell says he began being pulled over for speeding tickets and stopped at airport check-ins. His racial expression carried serious consequences. A photo of Malcolm Gladwell holding a paper and wearing a microphone. Figure 9. 12 writer Malcolm Gladwell's racial expression has impacted his treatment by others and his everyday experiences. Credit Crease Krug, Pop. Text/flicker/attribution 2 generic CCBY20. Gender. More and more, gender is also a diversity category that we increasingly understand to be less clearly defined. Some people identify themselves as gender fluid or non-binary. Binary refers to the notion that gender is only one of 2 possibilities, male or female. Fluidity suggests that there is a range or continuum of expression. Gender fluidity acknowledges that a person may vacillate between male and female identity. Asia Kate Dillon is an American actor and the first non-binary actor to perform in a major television show with their roles on Orange is The New Black and Billions. In an article about the actor, a reporter conducting the interview describes his struggle with trying to describe Dillon to the manager of the restaurant where the two plan to meet. The reporter and the manger struggle with describing someone who does not fit a predefined notion of gender identity. Imagine the situation. You're meeting someone at a restaurant for the first time, and you need to describe the person to a manager. Typically, the person's gender would be a part of the description, but what if the person cannot be described as a man or a woman? A photo shows a close-up portrait of Asia Kate Dillon. Figure 9. 13 Asia Kate Dillon is a non-binary actor best known for their roles on Orange is The New Black and Billions. Credit: Billions official YouTube channel /Wikimedia Commons /attribution 3. Unported, CCBY30. Within any group, individuals obviously have a right to define themselves. However, collectively, a group's self-determination is also important. The history of Black Americans demonstrates a progression of self-determined labels: Negro, Afro-American, Colored, Black, African American. Similarly, in the non-binary community, self-described labels have evolved. Nouns such as genderqueer and pronouns such as here, Z, and MX. Instead of Miss, Mrs., or Mr., have entered not only our informal lexicon, but the dictionary as well. Merriam-Webster's dictionary includes a definition of they that denotes a non-binary identity. That is, someone who fluidly moves between male and female identities. Transgender men and women were assigned a gender identity at birth that does not fit their true identity. Even though our culture is increasingly giving space to non-heteronormative, straight, people to speak out and live openly, they do so at a risk. Violence against gay, non-binary, and transgender people occurs at more frequent rates than for other groups. To make ourselves feel comfortable, we often want people to fall into specific categories so that our own social identity is clear. However, instead of asking someone to make us feel comfortable, we should accept the identity people choose for themselves. Cultural competency includes respectfully addressing individuals as they ask to be addressed. Table gender pronoun examples. Subjective objective, possessive, reflexive example. She her hers herself. She is speaking, I listen to her. The backpack is hers, he him his himself. He is speaking, I listen to him, the backpack is his. They them theirs themself. They are speaking, I listen to them, the backpack is theirs. Z her /zer hers /zers herself /zerself. Z is speaking, I listen to hear, the backpack is zers. Table 9. 1. The website TransStudent. Org provides educational resources, such as the above graphic, for anyone seeking clarity on gender identity. Note that these are only examples of some gender pronouns, not a complete list. Intersectionality. The many layers of our multiple identities do not fit together like puzzle pieces with clear boundaries between one piece and another. Our identities overlap, creating a combined identity in which one aspect is inseparable from the next. The term intersectionality was coined by legal scholar Kimberlé Crenshaw in 1989 to describe how the experience of Black women was a unique combination of gender and race that could not be divided into two separate identities. In other words, this group could not be seen solely as women or solely as Black. Where their identities overlapped is considered the intersection, or crossroads, where identities combine in specific and inseparable ways. A diagram illustrates the intersectionality wheel divided into two circles, one inside the other. Figure 9. 14. Our identities are formed by dozens of factors, sometimes represented in intersection wheels. Consider the subset of identity elements represented here. Generally, the outer ring are elements that may change relatively often, while the inner circle are often considered more permanent. There are certainly exceptions. How does each contribute to who you are, and how would possible change alter your self-defined identity? Intersectionality and awareness of intersectionality can drive societal change, both in how people see themselves and how they interact with others. That experience can be very inward-facing or can be more external. It can also lead to debate and challenges. For example, the term Latinx is growing in use because it is seen as more inclusive than Latino-Latina. But some people, including scholars and advocates, lay out substantive arguments against its use. While the debate continues, it serves as an important reminder of a key element of intersectionality. Never assume that all people in a certain group or population feel the same way. Why not? Because people are more than any one element of their identity. They are defined by more than their race, color, geographic origin, gender, or socioeconomic status. The overlapping aspects of each person's identity and experiences will create a unique perspective. Analysis question. Consider the intersectionality of race, gender, and sexuality, religion, ethnicity, and geography, military experience, age, and socioeconomic status, and many other ways our identities overlap. Consider how these overlap in you. Do you know people who talk easily about their various identities? How does it inform the way you interact with them? Questions to consider. What happens when we make assumptions about others? Are microaggressions honest mistakes? How do I know if I have a diversity problem? How important is diversity awareness in the college classroom? Avoid making assumptions. By now, you should be aware of the many ways diversity can be both observable and less apparent. Based on surface clues, we may be able to approximate someone's age, weight, and perhaps their geographical origin. But even with those observable characteristics, we cannot be sure about how individuals define themselves. If we rely too heavily on assumptions, we may be buying into stereotypes or generalizations. Stereotyping robs people of their individual identities. If we buy into stereotypes, we project a profile onto someone that probably is not true. Prejudging people without knowing them, better known as prejudice or bias, has consequences for both the person who is biased and the individual or group that is prejudged. In such a scenario, the intimacy of real human connections is lost. Individuals are objectified, meaning that they only serve as symbolic examples of who we assume they are instead of the complex, intersectional individuals we know each person to be. Stereotyping may be our way of avoiding others' complexities. When we stereotype, we do not have to remember distinguishing details about a person. We simply write their stories for ourselves and let those stories fulfill who we expect those individuals to be. For example, a hiring manager may project onto an Asian American the stereotype of being good at math, and hire her as a researcher over her Hispanic counterpart. Similarly, an elementary school teacher may recruit an Indian American 6th grader to the spelling bee team, because many Indian American students have won national tournaments in the recent past. A real estate developer may hire a gay man as an interior designer because he has seen so many gay men performing this job on television programs. A coach chooses a white male student to be a quarterback because traditionally, quarterbacks have been white men. In those scenarios, individuals of other backgrounds, with similar abilities, may have been overlooked because they do not fit the stereotype of who others suspect them to be. Earlier in this chapter, equity and inclusion were discussed as going hand in hand with achieving civility and diversity. In the above scenarios, equity and inclusion are needed as guiding principles for those with decision-making power who are blocking opportunity for non-traditional groups. Equity might be achieved by giving a diverse group of people access to internships to demonstrate their skills. Inclusion might be achieved by assembling a hiring or recruiting committee that might have a better chance of seeing beyond stereotypical expectations. Application. Often, our assumptions and their impacts are not life-changing, but they can be damaging to others and limiting to our own understanding. Consider the following scenarios and answer the questions that follow. Scenario 1. During an in-class conversation about a new mission to explore Mars, two classmates offer opinions. Student A says, "We should focus on this planet before we focus on others." Student B responds immediately with, "If we're going to stop climate change, we'll probably find the answer through science related to space travel." What assumption did student B make about student A's point? What else, aside from climate change, could student A have been considering? Scenario 2. For an important group project, an instructor designates teams of 6 students and gives them time to set up their work schedule for the assignment. One group of students, most of whom don't know each other well, agrees to meet 2 nights later. They initially propose to get together in the library, but at the last moment, one member suggests an off-campus restaurant. Several of the others agree right away and move on to other topics. The remaining 2 students look at each other uncomfortably. One interjects, suggesting they go back to the original idea of meeting in the library, but the others are already getting up to leave. It's clear that 2 of the students are uncomfortable meeting at the restaurant. What might be the reason that 2 of the students are not comfortable meeting over dinner? What assumptions did the others make? Being civil and inclusive does not require a deep-seated knowledge of the backgrounds and perspectives of everyone you meet. That would be impossible. But avoiding assumptions and being considerate will build better relationships and provide a more effective learning experience. It takes openness and self-awareness and sometimes requires help or advice, but learning to be sensitive, practicing assumption avoidance, is like a muscle you can strengthen. Be mindful of microaggressions. Whether we mean to or not, we sometimes offend people by not thinking about what we say and the manner in which we say it. One danger of limiting our social interactions to people who are from our own social group is in being insensitive to people who are not like us. The term microaggression refers to acts of insensitivity that reveal our inherent biases, cultural incompetency, and hostility toward someone outside of our community. Those biases can be toward race, gender, nationality, or any other diversity variable. The individual on the receiving end of a microaggression is reminded of the barriers to complete acceptance and understanding in the relationship. Let's consider an example. Anne is new to her office job. Her colleagues are friendly and helpful, and her first 2 months have been promising. She uncovered a significant oversight in a financial report and, based on her attention to detail, was put on a team working with a large client. While waiting in line at the cafeteria one day, Anne's new boss overhears her laughing and talking loudly with some colleagues. He then steps into the conversation, saying, "Anne, this isn't a night at one of your clubs. Quiet down." As people from the nearby tables look on, Anne is humiliated and angered. What was Anne's manager implying? What could he have meant by referring to your clubs? How would you feel if such a comment were openly directed at you? One reaction to this interaction might be to say, "So what? Why let other people determine how you feel? Ignore them." While that is certainly reasonable, it may ignore the pain and invalidation of the experience. And even if you could simply ignore some of these comments, there is a compounding effect of being frequently, if not constantly, barraged by such experiences. Consider the table below, which highlights common examples of microaggressions. In many cases, the person speaking these phrases may not mean to be offensive. In fact, in some cases, the speaker might think they are being nice. However, appropriate terminology and other attitudes or acceptable descriptions change all the time. Before saying something, consider how a person could take the words differently than you meant them. As we discussed in Chapter 8, emotional intelligence and empathy can help understand another's perspective. Microaggressions. Category microaggression, why it's offensive. Educational status or situation, you're an athlete, you don't need to study. Stereotypes athletes and ignores their hard work. You don't get financial aid. You must be rich. Even an assumption of privilege can be invalidating. Did they have honors classes at your high school? Implies that someone is less prepared or intelligent based on their geography. Race, ethnicity, national origin, you speak so well for someone like you. Implies that people of a certain race ethnicity can't speak well. No, where are you really from? Calling attention to someone's national origin makes them feel separate. You must be good at. Falsely connects identity to ability. My people had it so much worse than yours did. Makes assumptions and diminishes suffering difficulty. I'm not even going to try your name. It looks too difficult. Dismisses a person's culture and heritage. It's so much easier for Black people to get into college. Assumes that merit is not the basis for achievement. Gender and gender identity, they're so emotional. Assumes a person cannot be emotional and rational. I guess you can't meet tonight because you have to take care of your son. Assumes a parent of any gender cannot participate. I don't get all this pronoun stuff, so I'm just gonna call you what I call you. Diminishes the importance of gender identity, indicates a lack of empathy. I can't even tell you used to be a woman. Conflates identity with appearance and assumes a person needs someone else's validation. You're too good-looking to be so smart. Connects outward appearance to ability. Sexual orientation, I support you, just don't throw it in my face. Denies another person's right to express their identity or point of view. You seem so rugged for a gay guy. Stereotypes all gay people as being not rugged and could likely offend the recipient. I might try being a lesbian. May imply that sexual orientation is a choice. I can't even keep track of all these new categories. Bisexual, pansexual, asexual, and other sexual orientations are just as valid and deserving of respect as more binary orientations. You can't just love whomever you want. Pick one. Age, are you going to need help with the software? May stereotype an older person as lacking experience with the latest technology. Young people have it so easy nowadays. Makes a false comparison between age and experience. Okay, boomer. Dismisses an older generation as out of touch. Size, I bet no one messes with you. Projects a tendency to be aggressive onto a person of large stature. You are so cute and tiny. Condescending to a person of small stature. I wish I was thin and perfect like you. Equates a person's size with character. Ability, to a person using a wheelchair, I wish I could sit down wherever I went. Falsely assumes a wheelchair is a luxury, minimizes disabilities. You don't have to complete the whole test, just do your best. Assumes that a disability means limited intellectual potential. I'm blind without my glasses. Equating diminished capacity with a true disability. Table 9-2, have you made statements like these, perhaps without realizing the offense they might cause? Some of these could be intended as compliments, but they could have the unintended effect of diminishing or invalidating someone. Credit, Modification of Work by Daryl Wingsu 6. Everyone has a problem, implicit bias. One reason we fall prey to stereotypes is our own implicit bias. Joe Handelsman and Natasha Sacrini, who developed science and technology policy during the Obama administration, defined implicit bias. According to Handelsman and Sacrini, a lifetime of experience and cultural history shapes people and their judgments of others. Research demonstrates that most people hold unconscious, implicit assumptions that influence their judgments and perceptions of others. Implicit bias manifests in expectations or assumptions about physical or social characteristics, dictated by stereotypes that are based on a person's race, gender, age, or ethnicity. People who intend to be fair and believe they are egalitarian apply biases unintentionally. Some behaviors that result from implicit bias manifest in actions, and others are embodied in the absence of action. Either can reduce the quality of the workforce and create an unfair and destructive environment. 7. The notion of bias being implicit or unconsciously embedded in our thoughts and actions is what makes this characteristic hard to recognize and evaluate. You may assume that you hold no racial bias, but messages from our upbringing, social groups, and media can feed us negative racial stereotypes, no matter how carefully we select and consume information. Further, online environments have algorithms that reduce our exposure to diverse points of view. Psychologists generally agree that implicit bias affects the judgments we make about others. Harvard University's Project Implicit website offers an interactive implicit association test that measures individual preference for characteristics, such as weight, skin color, and gender. During the test, participants are asked to match a series of words and images with positive or negative associations. Test results, researchers suggest, can indicate the extent to which there is implicit bias in favor of or against a certain group. Completing a test like this might reveal unconscious feelings you were previously aware you had. The researchers who developed the test make clear that there are limitations to its validity, and that for some, the results of the test can be unsettling. The test makers advise not taking the test if you feel unprepared to receive unexpected results. Application: take the Project Implicit test and write a brief passage about your results. Do you think the results accurately reflect your attitude toward the group you tested on? Can you point to any actions or thoughts you have about the group you tested on that are or are not reflected in the test results? Will you change any behaviors or try to think differently about the group you tested on based on your results? Why or why not? Cultural competency in the college classroom. We carry our attitudes about gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, and other diversity categories with us wherever we go. The college classroom is no different than any other place. Both educators and students maintain their implicit bias and are sometimes made uncomfortable by interacting with people different than themselves. Take, for example, a female freshman who has attended a school for girls for 6 years before college. She might find being in the classroom with her new male classmates a culture shock and dismiss male students' contributions to class discussions. Similarly, a homeschooled student may be surprised to find that no one on campus shares his religion. He may feel isolated in class until he finds other students of similar background and experience. Embedded in your classroom may be peers who are food insecure, undocumented, veterans, atheist, Muslim, or politically liberal or conservative. These identities may not be visible, but they still may separate and even marginalize these members of your community. If, in the context of classroom conversations, their perspectives are overlooked, they may also feel very isolated. In each case, the student's assumptions, previous experience with diversity of any kind, and implicit bias surface. How each student reacts to the new situation can differ. One reaction might be to self-segregate, that is, locate people they believe are similar to them based on how they look, the assumption being that those people will share the same academic skills, cultural interests, and personal values that make the student feel comfortable. The English instructor at the beginning of this chapter, who assumed all of his students were the same, demonstrated how this strategy could backfire. You do not have to be enrolled in a course related to diversity, such as Asian American literature, to be concerned about diversity in the classroom. Diversity touches all aspects of our lives and can enter a curriculum or discussion at any time because each student and the instructor bring multiple identities and concerns into the classroom. Ignoring these concerns, which often reveal themselves as questions, makes for an unfulfilling educational experience. In higher education, diversity includes not only the identities we have discussed, such as race and gender, but also academic preparation and ability, learning differences, familiarity with technology, part-time status, language, and other factors students bring with them. Of course, the instructor, too, brings diversity into the classroom setting. They decide how to incorporate diverse perspectives into class discussions, maintain rules of civility, choose inclusive materials to study or reference, receive training on giving accommodations to students who need them, and acknowledge their own implicit bias. If they are culturally competent, both students and instructors are juggling many concerns. How do you navigate diversity in the college classroom? Academic freedom allows for honest conversations. Academic freedom applies to the permission instructors and students have to follow a line of intellectual inquiry, without the fear of censorship or sanction. There are many heavily contested intellectual and cultural debates that, for some, are not resolved. A student who wants to argue against prevailing opinion has the right to do so based on academic freedom. Many point to a liberal bias on college campuses. Conservative points of view on immigration, education, and even science are often not accepted on campus as readily as liberal viewpoints. An instructor or student who wants to posit a conservative idea, however, has the right to do so because of academic freedom. Uncomfortable conversations about diversity are a part of the college classroom landscape. For example, a student might use statistical data to argue that disparities in degrees for men and women in chemistry reflect an advantage in analytical ability for men. While many would disagree with that theory, the student could pursue that topic in a discussion or paper as long as they use evidence and sound, logical reasoning. I'm just me. Remember the response to the "What are you?" question for people whose racial or gender identity was ambiguous. I'm just me also serves those who are undecided about diversity issues or those who do not fall into hard categories such as feminist, liberal, conservative, or religious. Ambiguity sometimes makes others feel uncomfortable. For example, if someone states she is a Catholic feminist unsure about abortion rights, another student may wonder how to compare her own strong pro-life position to her classmate's uncertainty. It would be much easier to know exactly which side her classmate is on. Some people straddle the fence on big issues, and that is okay. You do not have to fit neatly into one school of thought. Answer your detractors with, "I'm just me," or tell them if you genuinely don't know enough about an issue or are not ready to take a strong position. Seek resources and projects that contribute to civility. A culturally responsive curriculum addresses cultural and ethnic differences of students. Even in classrooms full of minority students, the textbooks and topics may only reflect American cultural norms determined by the mainstream and tradition. Students may not relate to teaching that never makes reference to their socioeconomic background, race, or their own way of thinking and expression. Educators widely believe that a culturally responsive curriculum, one that integrates relatable contexts for learning and reinforces cultural norms of the students receiving the information, makes a difference. The K-12 classroom is different than the college classroom. Because of academic freedom, college instructors are not required to be culturally inclusive. They are usually required to be respectful and civil, but there are different interpretations of those qualities. Because American colleges are increasingly more sensitive to issues regarding diversity, faculty are compelled to be inclusive. Still, diversity is not always adequately addressed. In his TED Talk, Can Art Amend History?, the artist Titus Kaphar tells the story of the art history class that influenced him to become an artist and provides an example of this absence of diversity in the college classroom. Kaphar explains that his instructor led his class through important periods and artists throughout history, but failed to spend time on Black artists, something that Kaphar was anxiously awaiting. The instructor stated that there was just not enough time to cover it. While the professor probably did not intend to be non-inclusive, her choice resulted in just that. Kaphar let his disappointment fuel his passion and mission to amend the representation of Black figures in historical paintings. His work brings to light the unnoticed Black figures that are too often overlooked. A photo shows the famous work, Twisted Tropes, by Titus Kaphar hanging on a wall. Figure 9:15 in Twisted Tropes, Titus Kaphar reworks a painting to bring a Black figure to the forefront of an arrangement in which she had previously been marginalized. Credit, small curio/flickr/attribution 2, generic, CCBY20. Any student can respond to a lack of diversity in a curriculum, as Titus Kaphar did. Where you find diversity missing, when possible, fill in the gaps with research papers and projects that broaden your exposure to diverse perspectives. Take the time to research contributions in your field by underrepresented groups. Discover the diversity issues relevant to your major. Are women well represented in your field? Is there equity when it comes to access to opportunities such as internships? Are veterans welcomed? Do the academic societies in your discipline have subgroups or boards focused on diversity and equity? Most do. Resources for expanding our understanding and inclusion of diversity issues are all around us. Directly confront prejudice. To draw our attention to possible danger, the Department of Homeland Security has adopted the phrase, "If you see something, say something." That credo can easily be adopted to confront stereotypes and bias. If you hear something, say something. Academic freedom protects students and instructors from reprisal for having unpopular opinions, but prejudice is never correct, nor should it be tolerated. Do not confuse hate speech, such as sexist language, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and acts that reflect those points of view, with academic freedom. Yes, the classroom is a place to discuss these attitudes, but it is not a place to direct those sentiments toward fellow students, educators, or society in general. Most higher education institutions have mission statements and codes of conduct that warn students about engaging in such behavior. The consequences for violators are usually probation and possibly dismissal. Further policies such as affirmative action and Title IX are instituted to evaluate and maintain racial and gender equity. Application. No one knows when a racist or sexist attack is coming. The Barnard Center for Research on Women has created a video suggesting ways to be an ally to people victimized by intolerant behavior. Affirmative action and higher education. Affirmative action is a policy that began during the John F. Kennedy administration to eliminate discrimination in employment. Since that time, it has expanded as a policy to protect from discrimination in a number of contexts, including higher education. Most notably in higher education, affirmative action has been used to create equity in access. Institutions have used affirmative action as a mandate of sorts in admission policies to create diverse student bodies. Colleges sometimes overlook traditional admissions criteria and use socioeconomic and historical disparities in education equity as criteria to admit underrepresented groups. Affirmative action is a federal requirement to be met by entities that contract with the federal government. Most colleges are federal government contractors and must adhere to the policy by stating a timeline by which its affirmative action goals are met. Many interpret goals as quotas, meaning that a certain number of students from underrepresented groups would be admitted, presumably to meet affirmative action requirements. Opposition to affirmative action in college admissions has been pursued in several well-known court cases. Regents of the University of California v. Back. This 1978 case resulted in a U.S. Supreme Court decision to allow race to be used as one of the criteria in higher education admission policies as long as quotas were not established, and race was not the only criterion for admission. The case stemmed from Alan Back, an applicant to the University of California at Davis Medical School, suing the university because he was not admitted but had higher test scores and grades than minority students who had been accepted. Lawyers for Back reference the same Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment used to desegregate public schools in Brown v. Board of Education. The reverse discrimination denied him equal protection under the law. Fisher v. University of Texas. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court decided another affirmative action case regarding Fisher v. University of Texas. Abigail Fisher also argued that she had been denied college admission based on race. The case ended in favor of the university. Justice Kennedy, in the majority opinion, wrote, "A university is in large part defined by those intangible qualities which are incapable of objective measurement, but which make for greatness. Considerable deference is owed to a university in defining those intangible characteristics, like student body diversity, that are central to its identity and educational mission." In each of the above landmark cases, affirmative action in college admission policies were upheld. However, cases of reverse discrimination in college admission policies continue to be pursued. Analysis question: examine your college's code of conduct. You may find it in your student handbook, as part of an Office of Community Standards or Engagement, or by simply searching your college site. How does the Code of Conduct protect academic freedom, but guard against hate speech, prejudice, and intolerance? Title IX and Higher Education. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 states, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. As with affirmative action, Title IX applies to institutions that receive federal funding, such as public and charter schools, for-profit schools, libraries, and museums in the United States and its territories. According to the Office for Civil Rights, educational programs and activities receiving federal funds must operate in a non-discriminatory manner. Title IX addresses recruitment, admissions, and counseling, financial assistance, athletics, sex-based harassment, treatment of pregnant and parenting students, discipline, single-sex education, and employment. Before the enactment of Title IX, there were few, if any, protections provided for women college students. To give some perspective, consider this description of the circumstances. Young women were not admitted into many colleges and universities, athletic scholarships for women were rare, and math and science was a realm reserved for boys. Girls square danced instead of playing sports, studied home economics instead of training for male-oriented, higher-paying trades. Girls could become teachers and nurses, but not doctors or principals. Women rarely were awarded tenure and even more rarely appointed college presidents. There was no such thing as sexual harassment because boys will be boys, after all, and if a student got pregnant, her formal education ended. Graduate professional schools openly discriminated against women. 8. The protections of Title IX have been invoked in college athletics to ensure women's athletic programs are sustained. In addition, schools must make efforts to prevent sexual harassment and violence. Gender discrimination under Title IX extends to the protection of transgender students so that they are treated as the gender they identify with. Analysis question: based on the cases against affirmative action in higher education, are admissions policies that use race, along with other factors, as admissions criteria fair? What other options do you think would create equity in admissions? Questions to consider: is it my fault that I have privilege? How long will diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts continue? What is to be gained by cultural competency? Privilege is not just for white people. Privilege is a right or exemption from liability or duty granted as a special benefit or advantage. Oppression is the result of the use of institutional privilege and power, wherein one person or group benefits at the expense of another. 9. According to the University of Southern California, Susan Dworak Peck School of Social Work. Just as everyone has implicit bias, everyone has a certain amount of privilege, too. For example, consider the privilege brought by being a certain height. If someone's height is close to the average height, they likely have a privilege of convenience when it comes to many day-to-day activities. A person of average height does not need assistance reaching items on high store shelves and does not need adjustments to their car to reach the brake pedal. There's nothing wrong with having this privilege, but recognizing it, especially when considering others who do not share it, can be eye-opening and empowering. Wealthy people have privilege of not having to struggle economically. The wealthy can build retirement savings, can afford to live in the safest of neighborhoods, and can afford to pay out of pocket for their children's private education. People with a college education and advanced degrees are privileged because a college degree allows for a better choice of employment and earning potential. Their privilege doesn't erase the hard work and sacrifice necessary to earn those degrees, but the degrees often lead to advantages. And yes, white people are privileged over racial minorities. Remember Malcolm Gladwell's explanation of how he was treated when people assumed he was white as opposed to how people treated him when they assumed he was black. It is no one's fault that they may have privilege in any given situation. In pursuit of civility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the goal is to not exploit privilege but to share it. What does that mean? It means that when given an opportunity to hire a new employee or even pick someone for your study group, you make an effort to be inclusive and not dismiss someone who has not had the same academic advantages as you. Perhaps you could mentor a student who might otherwise feel isolated. Sharing your privilege could also mean recognizing when diversity is absent, speaking out on issues others feel intimidated about supporting, and making donations to causes you find worthy. In pursuit of civility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the goal is to not exploit privilege but to share it. When you are culturally competent, you become aware of how your privilege may put others at a disadvantage. With some effort, you can level the playing field without making yourself vulnerable to falling behind. Application. Think about a regular activity, such as going to a class. In what ways are you privileged in that situation? How can you share your privilege with others? Eternal vigilance is the price of civility. The original statement reads, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." History sometimes credits that statement to Thomas Jefferson and sometimes to Wendell Holmes. Ironically, no one was paying enough attention to document it accurately. Still, the meaning is clear: if we relax our standards, we may lose everything. Civility is like liberty, it requires constant attention. We have to adjust diversity awareness, policies, and laws to accommodate the ever-changing needs of society. Without the vigilance of civil rights workers, society could have lapsed back into the Jim Crow era. Without activists such as Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, and Flo Kennedy remaining vigilant, women might not have made the gains they did in the 1970s. Constant attention is still needed because in the case of women's earning power, they only make about 80 cents for every dollar a man makes. Constant vigilance requires passion and persistence. The activism chronologies of Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, the LGBTQ+ community, immigrants, students, labor, and other groups is full of stops and starts, twists and turns that represent adjustments to their movements based on the shifting needs of younger generations. As long as there are new generations of these groups, we will need to pursue diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your future and cultural competency. Where will you be in 5 years? Will you own your own business? Will you be a stay-at-home parent? Will you be making your way up the corporate ladder of your dream job? Will you be pursuing an advanced degree? Maybe you will have settled into an entry-level job with good benefits and be willing to stay there for a while. Wherever life leads you in the future, you will need to be culturally competent. Your competency will be a valuable skill not only because of the increasing diversity and awareness in America, but also because we live in a world with increasing global connections. If you do not speak a second language, try to learn one. If you can travel, do so, even if it's to another state or region of the United States. See how others live in order to understand their experience and yours. To quote Mark Twain, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness." The more we expose ourselves to different cultures and experiences, the more understanding and tolerance we tend to have. The United States is not perfect in its practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Still, compared to much of the world, Americans are privileged on a number of fronts. Not everyone can pursue their dreams as freely as Americans do. Our democratic elections and representative government give us a role in our future. Understanding diversity and being culturally competent will make for a better future for everyone.